The journey from Fremantle to Melbourne was not a smooth one, but very enjoyable nevertheless. When we arrived at the Docklands in Melbourne, the city looked magnificent and inviting. It had a certain twist, which was so unique to Australia. All our personal belongings were carried out to a collection area, and a group of ladies and men in official attire greeted us and the other passengers who arrived as immigrants. We were directed to an office to sign certain papers where our documents and passports have also been checked. Then yet another group of friendly people spoke to us, saying, "Welcome to Australia, and may your stay be a happy one." We were so enthusiastic, excited, and happy about having undertaken such a long journey, but also very curious about what our next steps would be like in a completely new country, populated by all kinds of people. Were they going to be happy with our presence? Were some of them to oppose us, even treat us badly? Was there going to be any discrimination against us, as I experienced in parts of Europe? Would Australians accept us with our traditional values and academic qualifications? One high-ranking officer asked us where we were going to stay, obliging me to explain that we were meant to travel to Hobart, as some friends of ours were waiting and were going to accommodate us for a short while. He looked puzzled, even surprised, and checked the availability of the next flight to Tasmania. When he came back, he said a taxi service to Essendon Airport had been organized for us to catch a plane normally used to fly dignitaries, and that there was enough room for us. With a very unhappy child, we enjoyed the flight on an Ansett Airlines aeroplane to Hobart, which took just over an hour. It was evening when we arrived in Hobart Airport, and our large belongings would be delivered when we have settled in our new home. Amongst our personal belongings we had a beautiful deck chair, which was given to us as a souvenir before disembarking the Angelino Lauro. As we walked across the runway after descending from the plane in the waiting area, a very excited Siegfried and Ruth were swinging a large placard with our names boldly written on it. In truth, I expected them to be waiting at their home after a short bus trip, but it was nice to see them at the airport. The Strohbach's home in Lena Valley, a suburb of Hobart, close to Mount Wellington, was in a beautiful farm setting. We enjoyed some snacks and talked about the interesting journey we had undertaken. We had so much to talk about, but halfway through, Ruth suggested that since we had come a very long way, we should settle in our bedrooms and rest a while. We could talk in the morning. I was not sure whether this was due to habit or genuine care on her part. However, we had rested well before our arrival. Siegfried was keen to show us a map of the world he had recently obtained, and we spoke all about the path we followed, and the events which took place on the way to Australia, somewhat in opposition to Ruth's suggestion. I made mention of the films I had shot, and asked him if it was all right to take photos of his big map, as I desired to add them to my documentary. Soon all my films were sent to AGFA's laboratories in Germany to be processed, and later I edited, spliced, added music and commentary. In the meantime, we took a little trip visiting their friends, who were either Jehovah's Witnesses or interested in their movement in various suburbs of Hobart. The city was not as sophisticated as the ones in Europe, but it had a beautiful and healthy atmosphere with extremely friendly people, reminding one of a sleepy English town somewhere in the country. On one side, Mount Wellington towered over the city, and on the other the sea stretched endlessly into distances far. The city of Hobart was truly inviting. We visited Glenorchy, a suburb of the city, and visited a sister Kurdovic of former Yugoslavian origin. The Kurdovics had a separate dwelling in their backyard, and would love to have us as tenants. They wanted us to look after the place and pay a minimal rent. This sister was closely befriended with the Strohbachs from their local congregation, and had a family which remained friendly with the Witnesses. They also had a large black-and-white television set in their lounge room. After we had settled in the small dwelling, which was just large enough for our needs, the Americans landed at the first man on the moon. Radio and television programs were replete with the important news of this most exciting event. Despite opposition expressed by Magda about watching the first moon landing on July the 16th, 1969, with the devil's tool, the television, I asked the Kurdovics if we could share this once-in-a-lifetime experience. We watched it in extreme awe. However, Magda kept interrupting and talking over the commentaries, exclaiming that this could only be lies, as Satan the devil was putting those images in front of our eyes, trying to make us believe in empty lies so that we may think very little of God's kingdom. Obviously she knew the entire truth in her supreme wisdom. At the time, Sister Kurdovic was busy in the kitchen preparing snacks and coffee. Soon Magda joined her, saying she could not stand such rubbish. I was thoroughly enjoying the program together with the children, who were very excited about this unique event. I was happy to experience what the rest of the world was watching. It was something I could never forget, but I believe Magda preferred it not to have happened. Probably other witnesses felt just the same. Living with extremely superstitious and cultist people who believed that their way was the only righteous one was the hardest thing to experience, let alone accept it as the reality. We were like chalk and cheese with our interests. I wished there had never been any involvement with Jehovah's Witnesses, who preached about supposed love everywhere, but never applied it, instead living with a very strict and backward dogma as their adopted belief system. When I met them in the early days, I thought there was hope after all, wondering if I could be helped only to take me out of that country where I was considered as the lowest kind of creature. In truth, my only involvement with them was simply just a desire to make new friends. Ideally, we need to accept everyone, whether they are black or white, tall or short, ugly or beautiful, with all their interests and even their beliefs. We can all learn things from each other and create an ideal society living in peace. I have been brought up accepting others as they were, living in harmony, without judging them. blending in with their system, while not necessarily becoming exactly like them. My involvement with the witnesses was just for the friendship, discovery, and accepting their help to escape possible innuendos interrupting my personal involvement as a human being. It was equally a beautiful thing to associate with interesting people. If they had been able to convince me about the absolute truth behind their wisdom, proving themselves to be completely true to their resolve, who knows, I might have been following a different pathway today. I have met many wonderful people, but at the same time I had to rescue myself from being belittled, undermined, and even forced to fail in all my endeavors. However, what I have discovered with the witnesses, after my long association with those so-called friends adhering to that belief system, my opinions about them was drastically changed. I never thought that people could be as extremely fanatical with their belief as even to destroy their own families in the name of self-made truths and supposed love. It has been very educational. Alas, the more extreme fanaticism and criticisms I experienced from Magda and her fellow believers, the more distant I became. It was indeed like jumping from the frying pan into the fire. Lydia H. Sigourney writes, "Life has indeed ills, but the mind that views every object in its most cheering aspect and every delightful dispensation as replete with latent good, bears within itself a powerful and perpetual antidote." The Straubachs were very content with their acre of land, goats, chickens, and lots of herbs. Their neighbor, an elderly bachelor, was intending to sell his piece of land and little shed to someone who could look after them, as he explained that he had nobody to pass them on to, and was willing to part from everything he owned for the very small sum. After speaking with this gentleman, he agreed that I could see him in the morning and pay him the money in cash. I was going to suggest that he could stay there as long as he desired without needing to pay anything, but in the morning he was no longer there, and the developer had already snatched it up. He had been quickly moved from there and was now housed in an old people's home. Upon this, Magda, supposedly consoling me, said that she was praying for this deal not to go ahead for us, as she did not want to be too materialistic. But I was saddened about the poor old gentleman. Sister Kurdevik, on the other hand, was very happy to accommodate us. Magda was content with the idea, and in reality she was over the moon. However, it was going to be very hard for us until our household goods from Germany were delivered, although she was not bothered. As long as we had a bed and some food on the table, she would not worry about anything. The most important task ahead for her was to preach the word of God to as many people as she could. I suppose her strict adherence to the commands she was issued with, in this instance, might have been good for her, as it gave her a sense of belonging. For me it was endurable for a short time. That is, at least, until our belongings arrived. In just under a week they were delivered, and I was pleased to discover that nothing was broken. Magda was also very happy to discover that her collection of Watchtower magazines and yearbooks were in perfect order. However, our white goods, which we had been advised to leave behind, because here in Australia every latest gadget was available, proved to be a traumatic experience. For example, our front-loader washing machine was completely unknown in Hobart, and we were even told by the salesperson that such could not have been invented yet, and that the only modern equipment they could supply us with was the twin tub with rollers on the top. They probably thought we were from planet Mars. No matter where we went and searched for what we were accustomed to having, we could not find it anywhere. It was as if we had traveled back in time by at least 20 years. As we unpacked our goods, we realized that we should have taken everything with us despite all the advice, but in good faith we left them all behind. About a week later, I was testing my small personal television set and discovered Channel 7 network broadcasting test color images and camera footage. Soon after, they began broadcasting some of their programs, particularly sporting events, in color. Some of our neighbors, having noticed the color screen, obviously spying through the windows, were curiously asking about what they were seeing. When it was explained, they could not believe that television could be in color. I wanted to replace my television with a large screen one, despite opposition from Magda, but they were either not yet available in Australia, or else were very expensive. For a long while we did not even have a black and white set in our lounge, for Magda considered it to be the devil's tool. Very rarely look at my small television set, and then only in private, but when Magda went visiting her dear brothers to preach with them door to door, I took it out with trepidation in case she decided to come home a little early, discovering me being engaged with an evil gadget, which took my mind off thinking about God's kingdom. This attitude on her part made me feel like a guilty little boy, and I was only living in fear with her. What I am freely expressing now, I dared not speak then, for fear of constant criticism about my being unfaithful to the great Creator and His divine commands. What I am saying now is not exaggerated. I prefer to remain as truthful as one can be. Even with my dreams, imaginings, and those unusual experiences I had, I prefer always to remain true. Since I do not seek any recognition from anybody, I do not seek approval for things I know and have experienced since my childhood. I was under constant pressure from some Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly Magda, and was unsure how to please my wife to keep the family going. On the other hand, although I had applied for positions through the higher education system in Hobart, my qualifications were considered to be either too high or they did not have an opening. I had no idea about the Australian social welfare schemes, where one could obtain minor assistance to help me find suitable employment. I was conducting a full research to discover whatever jobs were available, no matter how mediocre or unsatisfying. At one of the universities I was told that if they could obtain appropriate funding to start a branch of study with my input, they would happily employ me as a lecturer in social sciences, behavioral, or forensic psychology. This worried me, wondering if all my efforts in studying in Europe were wasted by coming to Australia on false promises. I was advised that I would have better chances in Sydney or Melbourne. This made me think perhaps I should take a brief holiday and visit Melbourne to see what might be available. They advised me that I might need to wait until the 1990s before being accepted with my qualifications as a professor. There were times I was stressed out for this great mistake I had made in coming to Australia, but I did not lose hope. I had a wife and child I loved dearly, but her fanaticism was worrying. I basically felt being forced to live a pretentious life in regard to the Jehovah's Witnesses if I wanted my marital status to last. I was unable to tell the absolute truth to any of them, for they would only take it as a bad joke. Besides, they were allegedly always right. I have tried and failed each time in doing so. Therefore, I continued doing mediocre and unsatisfying jobs while living in Hobart. This was the time when Magda fully realized my academic background, but she never wanted to take it seriously, for all that knowledge would be completely lost after Armageddon anyway, as she often declared. She was very happy that I was working and bringing the money in for rent, food, and her wonderful baby's needs, and the other expenses for kingdom interests. It was obviously not important if I was satisfied with my employment or not. Although we were not allowed to have any television sets under the rules and regulations set by Magda, almost all other witnesses I have known in Germany and Australia had sets prominently displayed in their lounge, but Magda had to be different. For her, everything had to be just black and white. She would not approve of a hi-fi system either, for it could present problems with temptations to listen to music, therefore interrupting one's constant interest in first seeking the kingdom of God. If I suggested anything about my interest in obtaining a simple music system, she immediately started lecturing me as if I was committing one of the greatest sins and was a young child needing parental guidance for very lengthy periods of time. She even told me, as one could endure, that I was very childish. Occasionally she protested and went to bed, sobbing uncontrollably, often advising me to concentrate on my priorities and act according to my age. This meant that I had to be always vigilant about our faith, about the end times, and most importantly, preaching the truth to the multitudes of people, attending all the meetings in the kingdom halls, and doing some pioneering work, while spending more time on house-to-house activities, and being praised by the elders on the platform. As a man, I was not meant to have any other interests, any hobbies, other than laboring jobs, cleaning windows, and earning some honest money. Much later I learned to my dismay that those witnesses with gaping big mouths were, in reality, recipients of unemployment benefits, which the Australian welfare system provides. But do they realize that they are unknowingly also subsidizing the Jehovah's Witness organization? I wondered if any of those witnesses had any interests or hobbies such as art, design, and photography. Did they also believe that sound systems or television sets were wrongdoers and sinners? Obviously, I was expected only to obey the rules and regulations dictated by Magda if I wanted my marriage to last. She was adamant, telling me that if I loved her, as I often told her, I should never consider obtaining electronic things. She certainly had the formula to literally and foolishly destroy her own family, and I was unsure how long we could last together. I decided to try different strategies, hoping to make our marriage work. But it literally meant that I had to pretend to be what I was not. This seemed to be the only way to survive the ordeal of being married with a Jehovah's Witness who was overly extreme in her resolve. I thought that one could combine some of my interests with theirs and create a tolerable state which could please both sides. In those days, Stanley Kubrick's film Space Odyssey 2000 was released, and I had seen it several times, enjoying every moment of it. Naturally, discreetly, without Magda realizing. Even the musical scores selected in that release were a delight to listen to. On one occasion, I suggested creating a short film clip with one of the young brothers taking on the role of Jesus, preaching to his disciples to love one another unconditionally, as he loved them. When creating this film, I utilized some of the musical scores from Space Odyssey 2000. After screening it in their Kingdom Hall, attended by a large congregation, Magda and a few other witnesses criticized me for using pagan music of the godless as in Kubrick's film. I occasionally went to their gatherings in the Kingdom Hall, which was built by the volunteering brothers and sisters, as they called each other, although the local council was unwilling to grant a permit. After the building was completed and certain inspections by the authorities conducted, they could not be forced out. It was also my understanding that the witnesses had the habitual tradition of erecting kingdom halls without approval, as many people confirmed. However, they have always considered their triumphs as the Lord God's blessing. We were told that it was made possible by the enormous amounts of money provided from members of their congregation. I was not sure how they had such huge sums of money available to pay for the properties they bought. Were they borrowing money? Were they getting subsidized by their headquarters? Or were they provided with large sums of donated money by their members who became old? During one of those services, I was asked if I would play the role of Hermes in a sketch they had organized. I even painted a huge cardboard boat and designed the backdrops and costumes. I had to organize the appropriate materials, makeup, and wigs. I wore beautiful blue attire, as the historic Jews and Romans used to wear, with a false beard which needed to be stuck. When the performance took place, the hall was completely full. This seemed to please Magda immensely. I was then asked to conduct Bible classes with some of them. I was going to go along with that, just to please Magda and discover a little more about the workings of their movement, while still remaining absolutely neutral and without judging anyone. However, Jehovah's Witnesses still could not provide any answers to the age-old questions I used to ask, even when a child. When conducting these so-called Bible studies, always shared by Magda, I used to read passages from the Bible, and she used to make comparisons with the information provided in their Watchtower and Awake magazines. Such was my conducting of Bible classes. However, it always remained superficial, as I could not be persuaded to believe in a mythological God who could not prove to me that he independently existed and was not a human creation. I could not understand how a great God could destroy his wonderful creation with multiple excuses, always pointing a finger and judging them in the most jealous ways, and putting them through all sorts of hardships. If a God truly created humanity, why did he or she choose a special group of people, telling them they should not worship idols, but him alone, and after creating circumstances for them to commit incest in order to populate the earth, not to sin? Nothing made any sense, and like all their members, I was expected to believe everything they forever repeated under the banner of new discoveries issued forth from their headquarters in Brooklyn, New York. Yet they all considered me a faithful brother, while nobody ever questioned me about being or not being baptized in their faith. That was a good thing, for my family seemed to be reasonably well-functioning from an outsider's view. But on one side I was becoming very tired with the jobs I was involved in, and on the other I was inordinately thankful for her helping me regret any involvement with a society bent with what they believed as the only truth. I decided to say nothing to her any longer, and continued with my pretense until the time was right to speak of the truth. Then again things might change, and we could experience real happiness. Hopefully her love would have grown a little more. As you can guess, working in jobs which used to take much of my valuable time provided me with a much-needed escape. Once I applied for a job at Channel 7 Studios in Hobart, for there was a position advertised as a cameraman. During the interview, somebody dressed in a very flamboyant costume with homosexual tendencies asked me a few questions, and promptly told me that with my complete male attitude and lack of knowledge, he could not accept me. When I answered his questions, he told me all what I knew was for color television. They only had black and white television in Australia, and I should have stayed in Europe to work in a color studio. I thought it quite charming indeed. Later I specifically called him on the telephone and told him that it was their loss and no tragedy to me. He may have thought that because I was from a seemingly backward European background, I should not be cognizant about Australian sophistication. I say this because some other people expressed themselves likewise when we talked about this very issue. After arriving in Hobart and moving to our new address, I found a job as a window cleaner, which pleased a number of faithful brothers and sisters. They did not realize nor care how dangerous the job was. I had no idea what it was about, but I was going to try it. With this job, we had to climb outside tall buildings, sometimes in a harness, and sometimes in a basket hanging from the roof. It was a type of job I had never experienced before. There was a new building on Elizabeth Street, several stories high, and I was to assist a window cleaner and detailer from within a basket. My first job was to peel off the blue plastic protective coatings from the aluminium window frames. I was advised not to look down at the street below and only concentrate on the windows in front of me, and I would get used to it very soon. There was also a middle-aged gentleman who had been working with their company for a long time, and being a very heavy drinker even when he worked, he had a fall some time ago from the top floor, from one of those baskets, but miraculously nothing happened to him. He had not even the slightest scratch. I was told that it was probably due to his drinking habits. It was a puzzle, but the idea was absolutely scary. We spent about a week doing that job, and then were directed to clean the huge windows of a car dealer's salon. It was also an interesting experience, and gave me a chance to get to know what cars were displayed. What a beautiful opportunity it was, as I applied for a job there, and they were going to let me know when there was an opening as a salesman. After a few weeks, we were told by the cleaning company that they were going to contact us when the next assignment became available, making me realize that this job of cleaning windows was a seasonal one and was not going to bring a regular income. That was a shock for the system, as I had not been informed about the nature of the job right in the beginning. I rushed to search for another job and followed the advice given to me about not to say anything in regard to my academic background. I found yet another occupation, this time in a city hotel. I was now to work as a kitchen hand, washing dishes for the cooks. It was a messy and very wet job. There were a couple of others who were also washing dishes, and the head chef pushed us to hurry up without giving us any chance to even have a lunch break. He gave me the additional duty of feeding the pigs in the backyard. I was ordered to feed them with all the scraps and lots of tin cans. When I made a remark that when pigs were eating those metal cans, they were cutting themselves and bleeding from their mouths, the chef was unbearably angry, ordering me to just feed them with what they gave me, including the cans, and never question their authority. In the corners of this large kitchen, there were heaps of rubbish collected and left to rot. I was to feed that to the pigs as well. In every corner there were several big cockroaches and worms. I was told also to feed them to the pigs, and the whole thing became too much to bear. I survived the ordeal for a short while, but could not and did not want to continue with this experience. Out of protest, I stopped, and especially after the head chef swore at me. I simply washed my hands, packed my belongings, and walked out of the building, while they all looked askance at me, uneasily asking how anybody could dare walk away from that job. I said nothing, and left that luxurious hotel complex. When I spoke about my dilemma, I was angrily criticized by my wonderful wife, making me regret going home. Magda again lectured me about her worries and my need to understand why her priorities had to be my only concern. This made me feel completely lost and devastated. Over the following few days, I was going to search for yet another job and start painting for possible exhibitions of my artwork. I was not going to stop creating art, even when I started to work on a full-time basis. What he is, I know not. What he is not, I know. Socrates. There was a large company selling and repairing white goods as part of a department store, and they were looking for an assistant for their mobile repair service. Soon after applying, I started traveling with a young gentleman who was keen talking about the teachings of Billy Graham. He used to drive to the private homes of people, and I worked alongside him. He kept preaching to me all about his faith, which he was unconditionally dedicated to. He was very friendly and happy working with me. We repaired many washing machines, but I did not see any of the machines and dryers we got to love when in Europe. That employment felt like a holiday and was enjoyable. I worked with them for a while, spending lots of time outside, happy to be away from home. Magda was not happy about me coming home so tired that I could not be bothered going house to house with her. She was also not happy for my feeling tired, so that I could not spend much time attending the most important district assemblies and Kingdom Hall. Unfortunately, the company I was working for was going through hard times, needing to dismiss some of their workers. I was once again one of the lucky ones and was told that regrettably I had to search for another job. This felt as if huge bricks had fallen on my head. At least I was continually creating landscapes in my works of art, amongst which I painted images of Hobart City. Somebody I knew at the National Gallery in Hobart assisted me to display those works with the option to profit from them. Magda started to show some interest in my paintings, and I decided to help her with an accelerated method I developed, teaching her the basics in painting, using a variety of mediums. She preferred acrylic painting best, but her other activities were still the absolute priority. I was happy to start her on a very beneficial and relaxing hobby. In the meantime, I tried very hard to find more suitable employment, particularly in the academic sector, but it was not to be for a while yet. From time to time, I flew over to Melbourne to seek different types of employment. Without any work, there was no income, and at this time, as mentioned, I had no idea that there existed a welfare system in Australia I could also benefit from while searching for suitable occupation. Then I discovered that both Sydney and Melbourne universities looked more promising, for both of them were willing to let me know when a position became available. Every time I returned home from those trips, Magda told me all about her wonderful pioneering activities, and excitedly spoke how happy she was being baptized into this faith. I took yet another job while still living in Hobart, this time with a fruit and flower grower just behind where we lived. Every morning I walked to work and home in the evening. They were a husband and wife team and very friendly people. They supplied herbs, fruits, and lots of flowers to department stores in and around the city. My duties were varied, mainly tending the earth, helping with their worm farm, and planting seeds and bulbs. Later I also helped them load the trucks with pot plants, flowers, Christmas trees, etc. The farmer's wife often offered us home-baked pastries and coffee or tea. The whole day long we always had a blaring radio at work, but working in the fresh air with plants was the best thing that could ever happen. I enjoyed that job, and both husband and wife became my friends. I kept sharing some of the activities my wife with her brothers and sisters engaged in by walking with them when they went door to door, as I wanted to know how they felt doing what they did. On one occasion, a noisy little dog attempted to bite my shoes, making me jump up and down as I tried to walk. It must have looked so funny, but I was not sure if she even noticed. There were certainly some very memorable moments. However, I felt like a prisoner when she literally forced me to feel obliged to share those activities she considered being most important. Unfortunately, my sentence seemed never-ending. With all my hobbies, whether they were liked or not, some of my interests she appeared to like. For instance, painting in oils. I kept painting cityscapes of Hobart, his Cat and Fiddle Arcade, the harbour, and so forth. Displaying and eventually selling them was something Magda also liked. Especially profiting from such endeavors interested her. I made a suggestion like taking some smaller paintings, created by myself, and visiting people. This way, I started going house to house with her, and interesting a lot of folk. Sometimes we sold them, sometimes she attempted to take them round the shops, and was able to sell the smaller works of art quickly. That pleased her immensely. I was able to exhibit several of my paintings at the National Gallery. I remember lots of people showing interest in those works, and one of them was a politician from the local government in Tasmania. Once he wanted to go to a local sauna and swimming pool with me, and asked me if I was like all other French artists. Being quite naturally worried, for I was definitely not what he might have hoped for, he insisted that I should visit him in his hotel room one evening. I was shocked by his desire to be engaged in possibly homosexual activities, and I never attempted to see him again. It indeed felt like a nightmare. He must obviously have erroneously thought of me in his dreaming mind, that I might have similar tendencies. However, I wanted to think kindly, as I exclaimed within my mind, "My nightmare friend, not all artists of French origin, or from other countries, are, as you may have hoped for." Also during this time, I was discreetly buying books and hiding them from Magda, in addition to those which I had already taken with me amongst my other personal belongings. I loved reading them, as I still do. It is so beautiful to hold a book in my hands and smell their unique aroma. Many of them were expensive textbooks related to human anatomy or neurosciences and psychology in German or English. Some of them, however, were either science fiction or UFO-based. There were so many books written about them, and some were simply untrue. However, they were replete with fine imagination and lots of guesses. Unfortunately, a few of my most valuable textbooks, copies of my essays on human behavior, and many of my fiction books disappeared from time to time. Amongst them were George Adamski's Flying Saucers Have Landed, and Inside the Flying Saucers. They may not have been entirely correct about the reality of intergalactic travelers George was involved in, but they were my books, some of which had been given to me a long time ago. Later, Magda confirmed that she was eliminating, even burning my books, which apparently promoted devil worship. She hoped and demanded that if I truly loved her, I would not mind, or be angry with her, help in getting rid of those satanic books, which included irreplaceable psychology-related literature. Obviously, she could not see the difference between a textbook and a science fiction novel. I was flabbergasted, speechless, and shocked. I felt frozen somewhere in mid-air, yet kept my cool. I uttered no words for a very long time, but when I found copies of George Adamski's books at an antique bookstore, I had to have them. From then on, I decided to keep all my belongings and books in a box I could lock, but I discovered that my valuable books were still disappearing, one by one, and, interestingly, were replaced with worthless Jehovah's Witness literature. This time, I felt the need to talk to her in an amicable way about how wrong she was in eliminating what belonged to me. Her response was that she was only doing what was right, and doing everything to please her God, Jehovah. And if I had any sense or love in my heart, I would get rid of all those evil books I collected throughout the years. Those books, particularly my textbooks, were worth hundreds of dollars. Without saying anything, I put all the Bibles, magazines, and books related to their movement I had been given into a tin container in the backyard, poured fuel over them, and had a bonfire. When she felt very troubled, I told her gently, "All those evil books are now being eliminated," then strictly instructed her never to touch my belongings again. She sobbed a little and called me by a number of curly words. Would this perhaps teach her a lesson? I had never been brought up like that. Therefore, damaging someone else's belongings has always been foreign to me. Here I was, having my personal valuables being burned, because Jehovah's Witnesses considered them as evil. "If you really love me, you would get rid of them," she repeated over and over for days. I borrowed many books from the library on subjects of health, nutrition, the human body, and astronomy. Some of those books were also burned, and I had to pay large sums of money by way of reparation. I was lectured over and over again that Satan was very powerful, and to change the minds of the faithful servants of the Lord, he presented marvelous signs and created false hopes and expectations. Apparently, this was also written in the Bible. According to their wisdom, those books were very dangerous. One can see what kind of dilemma I had to put up with. It was enough to turn anyone completely against them and their belief. From time to time, we visited the Straubachs in Lena Valley, and our time was often spent reading the Bible in turns. On one of those occasions, when it was my turn, I deliberately read it using an American speech pattern, because the words I was reading were printed in the American way. There was a pause, and a while later, Siegfried asked me why I chose to read God's words in an ugly American accent. As they were looking at each other, I asked him who could truly judge American being ugly. Being German, he did not like the American language, he exclaimed. I explained to them that all Jehovah's Witness literature originated from that country, and out of respect I chose to read that passage in American. Furthermore, I have never taken any teachings related to that school of thought seriously. I was bitterly criticized. However, it did not have the effect they hoped to have on me. I was not going to be embarrassed to have read that passage in American. Hobart and Lena Valley in particular bring back some very interesting memories. For example, little Annette sitting by a wooden fence and letting the nanny goats chew her hair, covering her head in their saliva. And when she was told she should not let those animals chew her long hair, as usual she would giggle, saying, "I like it," or "I don't know." One other time, when visiting the Strohbachs, and having decided to sleep overnight at Magda's insistence, rising very early in the morning, our once-in-a-lifetime breakfast is worth remembering. It was prepared in a health-conscious way, for Ruth was interested in holistic well-being. There were jars of sesame seeds, nuts, sunflower kernels, homemade bread, honey, tea, and coffee on the table. Interestingly, Siegfried sat very close to Magda. In fact, Magda was literally leaning on his chest. I sat in front of them, observing how far they were going to go with their comedy sketch. But I was not going to make any remarks or facial expression. They behaved like a married couple, or even lovers, who had met again after a long separation. Was it a theatrical display to see what effect it would have on me? They may have thought of me being incapable of noticing. I was not going to get stirred nor show any emotion, just to make a point. They looked deeply into each other's eyes, smiling. Ruth had also noticed the situation, but ignored it. Magda was her old self again, highly excited and very talkative. Then they began to share their spoons. Siegfried was taking spoonfuls of sesame seeds and honey, putting them in his mouth, and then putting the same spoon in hers. She was thoroughly enjoying the experience of sharing each other's juices. A very unusual scenario indeed. Magda was first licking the spoon partially, and then putting it in Siegfried's mouth. They kept doing this for a considerable length of time. Ruth and I looked at them and made no sound. It was like a very immature-minded youngster's game. Siegfried was certainly in his element, and knew what he was doing, apart from being extremely flirtatious. When this unique breakfast was over, and we were back in our room to pack our things before going home, Magda asked me, while hysterically laughing, to kiss her. In her small mind, was she perhaps teasing me? Was she aware what was really happening? I told her to wash her mouth thoroughly first, and she got extremely agitated, asking me if I was jealous or what. If she was not trying to make me jealous, why did she even ask? I told her that if I was somebody else, I would be jealous, and even perhaps kill her. But I was not that kind. I asked her again to wash her mouth, as I did not want to consume her boyfriend's juices. This time, she deliberately asked me if I was jealous, as she was sharing the same spoon with Siegfried, and I asked her again to wash her mouth. Why did she need to ask me such a question? I explained that I was only cautious about other people's bugs, and that I did not want to have them transferred to me. Still agitated, she said, "Oh, I can do anything I like. He is my brother." Probably Siegfried also felt quite good about the situation, knowing how naive Magda was. Is it not interesting how some people can turn their partner's life topsy-turvy with their jealousies? For I remember how she kept asking me if this girl or the other woman was better looking than her. Had she got better lips than me? You were looking at her legs, were you not? I bet she has better breath than me, hasn't she? These were sentences I was subjected to on a daily basis when we were living together. While stubbornness shelters one from reality, open-mindedness reveals all of life's truths.